Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of Tales from the Fandom. I am joined by returning guest and one of my temporary fill-in hosts when I was taking a break about a year or so ago. I'm joined by Brett Stewart of Movie Go Round podcast. And Brett, thank you so much for coming back and joining me on this episode.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. That was so much fun. I can't believe that was a year ago when I filled in. So thanks for having me. I'm very, very excited to be here.
I am very happy to have you. And I do have to preface this by saying that I reached out because you and the Movie Go Round podcast had an episode titled Future Classics. It's one of the things that you do. Every fifth episode is a future classic. And you had picked The Last Jedi, which really surprised me because it's one of those movies that is very divisive, and it made me go back and I watched it twice as I was listening to your episode, because it took me about a week or so to go through the episode. And after finishing two rewatches of the movie and listening to that episode, I have to agree with the overall sentiments of the Movie Go Round crew of Future Classic.
Oh, I could quit podcasting. I feel like now I'm in a good place that I can just kind of hang up my flag now, because I got someone to not only listen to the episode but agree with the opinion and go and rewatch the Last Jedi. Thank you. Yeah, so that was a panel where myself, David, and Nicole, my two co-hosts, were on a similar page regarding whether or not the movie in question is a future classic. A lot of times the panel is more divided, and there'll be folks on the panel that don't quite agree whether or not a film is a classic or will be a classic. And David, Nicole, and I were on a very similar page. We all had a love for it. And I think, interestingly enough, after seeing Rise of Skywalker, I think all of us are on a similar page again. I won't speak for them and whether or not they loved that movie or didn't, but I think in my conversations with them afterward, it seemed like all three of us were more cemented in our belief that it is a future classic, now having seen the complete sequel trilogy.
Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where even just the mention of it, we were talking before we started, and it's one of those things where I'm on Twitter a lot, and like a lot, and there are just so much since Rise of Skywalker came out, when The Last Jedi came out, and I feel like I love Star Wars. I love all the movies that they've done, even if Phantom Menace has aged to the point where I'm like nodding along and I like most of the stuff that I see in it. I mean, I could take or leave some of the parts, but overall, like, I have a positive opinion about all the movies. And of course, with Disney Plus and what they're doing, which I'm going to kind of like leave off because that's its own separate entity. But
Sure.
the Skywalker saga, the 9 movies, I like them all for a lot of different reasons. And dang, if the people on Twitter just make me feel bad to have liked almost any of them at this point.
Yeah, my goodness, the Star Wars community as a whole, it's a very toxic one for a myriad of reasons. It's toxic toward the actors and actresses that are in the films more often than not. One of the conversations we had on Movie Go Round was the vitriol that was just spewed upon Kelly Marie Tran post Last Jedi, and the woman who plays Rose. And there's always been this thing with Star Wars where it's either, if you touch it the way I don't like, you ruin my childhood, which doesn't really work for me because your childhood's still there. The movies you loved are still there. Whatever is new does not taint what is old, at least in my opinion. So there's always been that really possessive mentality around it, whether it's we're going to attack people like Kelly Marie Tran, or we're going to say the new movies are bad because they're not like the old movies. And as a result, I fail to think of similar fandoms that get quite as angry as Star Wars fans can get.
It is something. I know I just read an article about like sock puppet accounts on Twitter and how they influenced like John Boyega to like tweet some stuff and do some Instagram stuff and like come out about like people who like Rey and Kylo Ren's relationship, which was a theme through the sequel trilogy, and got him to respond that he's still like Finn is still around for Rey, or people that were Finn and Poe Dameron supporters wanting those two characters to get together. It's so like in fact there was somebody that I follow on Twitter and she posted something and it caught me off guard, and I went to click on and check her profile. She's like, I will block people that like Rey and Kylo Ren on site, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I just I don't know. Like I can't with the Star Wars fandom right now.
Yeah, so I was one of those folks where I left Rise of Skywalker frustrated for a lot of reasons. I will openly say it is one of my least favorite Star Wars films. With that said, though, I sat back very early on after seeing it, and I resaw it a couple times as well, and said to myself, "Is this what I want it to be? No, but is it still something I can appreciate in the broad scheme of this wonderful story that I've loved all my life? And am I really going to waste what is great about it and just be angry about what I don't like?" And I decided that just enjoying what I do like about it and appreciating the story as a whole was more important to me. There are a lot of things I wish were done very differently with Rise of Skywalker, but I'm not going to fight people on Twitter over it. There's a line with Star Wars fans that I just don't want to cross, that everyone seems willing to just run over.
hmm that was my general consensus when I went to go see Rise of Skywalker. I heard like some of the stuff coming out from the people that had seen it like early, like the day earlier, the day and a half early, whatever. And I went to see it that morning, and I went in knowing that is not going to be everything that I want, because it can't. It can't be everything that
Right.
I want and everything that you want and everything that someone else wants. It's not going to do that. And honest to goodness, like my original thought when I sat down was, I can't believe we're even here, because 10 years ago, no one thought that a sequel trilogy would ever get made anyway.
Right. Great point. Yeah.
Because you me the older fans lived through the whole time of, man, we people versus George Lucas. George Lucas ruined Star Wars. George Lucas did this. George Lucas did that. And then George Lucas sold it and was like, you know what? I'm done with Star Wars. Here you go, Disney, take it away. And Disney did what Disney wanted to do. Is every choice that Disney made great? There's definitely ups and downs of that trilogy, but go back to the people watching Phantom Menace and read those reviews, but they're not anywhere near as like the reviews that are now. And I think it's because people are just within seconds live tweeting through the movie, or putting up a YouTube video, or even recording podcasts like I'm doing now with you, and just there's so much out there instantly, and it's like I'm just happy that we got more Star Wars, and I'm happy that like my kids, if they watch those Star Wars movies, which I think they watched Last Jedi, and I think that's the only one of the new ones that they've watched, but they've watched Last Jedi and they liked it, and I'm good with that. Like they can that's their movie right now for Star Wars.
For sure. It's a whole new generation that gets the opportunity to see it in theaters. I remember going and seeing the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and those were films that I saw when I was younger, and seeing them in theaters was magical. It was really exciting, And I think having Star Wars for every generation is a very magical thing. And like or hate, the big mouse, they've certainly brought that back when someone like George Lucas really didn't seem to want to.
Hmm.
And if he had, I don't know how well it would have gone anyway. So they've done I think, by and large, a pretty good job of bringing Star Wars back to the masses. I personally think that the most interesting stories are yet to come in terms of what they can do on TV shows like The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan coming up and those sorts of things. And I think the fact that Ryan Johnson, the director of The Last Jedi, is getting his own trilogy to play around in,
Hmm.
something that he has talked about being in a galaxy very different than what we are familiar with. It could be in a totally different setting and place with none of the same characters. That is really exciting to me. I think as much as I've loved the Skywalker films, and I think that they've ended nicely now, uh, it is time, I think, for some other stories. And I think Disney knows that. And that's what I'm really excited about. And I think that a whole new generation now gets to experience that, like your kids. They're going to get to see Star Wars in theaters growing up, where otherwise they wouldn't have.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where I like, on top of the Star Wars movies, like I was always a big Star Wars book reader. I read as much of it as I could, especially back in like my like tens and twenties when I was young and could actually read and burn through books quickly. And now it's like I have too much stuff to do.
Right.
But some of the stuff that I read would make perfect movies or TV shows or properties of Star Wars. Like I always wanted the X-Wing book series to be made into a TV show or movie where you follow like a squadron of fighter pilots as they're going through, whatever missions that they have. And it almost be akin to like watching Battlestar Galactica in that sense.
Ooh, that'd be cool. Yeah, no,
Or
absolutely.
I think there's one that was like Tales of the Bounty Hunters or Tales from the Cantina or Tales from Jabba's Palace, where it's like you follow these different characters and it's each story is so completely different. And I think when Rogue One came out, I was like, oh man, Rogue One, like I don't think anyone asked for that movie, but like the last half of that movie was everything that I could have wanted in a Star Wars movie. You have these characters that at a certain point you're like, yeah, they're all gonna die. Like, I can't believe that. It's just there's so much in that universe that is untouched, ready to explore. I'm just excited to see what actually does come next out of the Star Wars franchise. But I'm concerned because I feel like after The Last Jedi, the vocal, and I don't know, I don't want to say the vocal minority, but the vocal like 30 or 40% that was out there on the internet definitely seemed to like, I don't know if they influenced Rise of Skywalker or I've read so many different like responses of what the other movie by I think it's Colin Trevorrow had
Yes, the
prepped.
director of Jurassic World.
Yeah, so like there's so much out there and I'm like I don't know if there was influence if the like because I've also heard like there wasn't the overarching like they didn't have an overarching plot from 7 to 9. Like that wasn't a thing where they said, "Okay, here's the beats that we need to hit and have the story and how we'd like to end it." But I don't know. Like I'll let you talk for a second because I got rambly there.
No, so first of all, like if we break it down, it's kind of mind-blowing if you think about it that a $1 billion franchise, the likes of Star Wars, Disney did not entrust that to a crew that was going to maintain a specific story arc in some capacity from A to Z. They didn't have a Kevin Feige like Marvel does, where that dude planned films out 25 films in advance.
Hmm.
And that's why Marvel was as cohesive as it was getting from A to Z. With this, they very much had the idea of pass this to one director, pass it to a second one, give it to a third one, and they all kind of get to do whatever they want. And I think that was a detriment and a benefit in different ways. The obvious detriment is that there wasn't really a cohesive understanding of where the story was going to go. At the beginning of filming this, nobody had any idea that Palpatine was going to come back and that that was going to be our bad guy, or that was Rey's heritage. You might want to throw a spoiler warning at the top of the show. But no one knew that sort of stuff. That was something, and heck, I don't even think Rian Johnson knew that stuff. I think that that was something that Kathleen Kennedy and J.J. Abrams decided to move forward with the third film. And it seemed to me like, how could you make a franchise this giant with this much money and not have that arc? And I think they entrusted their directors to varying degrees of success. I think that the reason, obviously the reason folks seem to hate The Last Jedi, and inversely, the reason I love The Last Jedi, was because Rian Johnson did not play that story particularly safe. He made a lot of decisions that are totally different from other Star Wars films. He made, just to name a couple, he made Luke cynical and angry, and that was something that a lot of fans hated, even though I imagine I would be if I had been through what Luke had been through. He made Rey a nobody, which was great because it showed you that anybody can be the hero. And that's even how The Last Jedi ends, with the stable boy on the gambling planet, where he grabs the broom with the Force. It shows you like, oh my God, there's other people out here that can do what Rey does. You don't have to be a Skywalker or a Kenobi or a Palpatine in that particular case. And I thought that was a really poignant message. And I thought it was an important message for younger viewers too. And then there was the backlash. And that, I think, to your point, is when JJ comes in and a lot of stuff gets changed. We don't see much of Kelly Marie Tran, which they've now backtracked because people didn't like Kelly Marie Tran. We don't get the resolution of Rey being a nobody. She now has to be a somebody because people didn't like that. Luke's demeanor changes pretty significantly in the film because people really didn't like how Luke acted in The Last Jedi. And I think it's a very reactionary film in that regard. I don't think there's any way to look at it that doesn't show you that a lot of that really hefty aggression from the fandom didn't influence some of the decisions that JJ made.
Yeah, it's like when I sat down to watch the movie, one of course the there I had two big problems with Rise of Skywalker. The first one was Kelly Marie Tran, because you're left at the end of the movie thinking like, man, she's going to be a part of the group. Like she's going to be she not to like, lump it in and say she's going to be the Lando Calrissian of the trio essentially, but that's what I expected. I expected her and Poe and Finn and Rey to be like doing stuff, or if Rey's training, like those three doing things. And hey, I'm cool with aliens. I love when they bust out aliens, but they couldn't have put her on the Millennium Falcon even for like the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah. And the funny thing was that then Lucasfilm came out and said, well, the reason that she wasn't in more than what she was in was because she was in a bunch of scenes planned with Leia, and we just couldn't get the Carrie Fisher footage to look the way it needed to look, so we cut a lot of those scenes. At which point, somewhere up in heaven, Carrie Fisher was like, "You did what?" Like, she would hate that response. She would be fuming at everyone involved if their excuse for cutting out Kelly Marie Tran was that they couldn't get her in the scenes with her, which I found incredibly amusing. But that was really very much their excuse, and I just don't buy it because JJ sets her up. I mean, I'm sorry, Rian Johnson sets her up to be a pivotal character in the group, to your point. And then it's gone, just completely gone. Any chemistry between her and Finn, romantic or otherwise, alluded to in the first film, is seemingly just completely disregarded. They just act like it didn't happen, and that's very weird to me.
Yeah, that was weird, and I hate that they even, brought up the I guess I'd I'd rather them have not said anything than keep going on about why they didn't, because some of those scenes where they did use the Carrie Fisher stuff that was recorded during like Force Awakens or The Last Jedi, whenever it was recorded, some of that stuff still didn't look good. Like there were
Yeah.
definitely pieces and parts where I'm like, it's not fitting where it should be. It's not exactly like a good seamless transition at times.
That you're totally right. Like, let's not kid ourselves into believing that the scenes looked that spectacular anyway, right? Um, I mean, they're special, and I felt so emotional throughout all of them because I love Carrie Fisher to my
Hmm.
core. But you definitely feel as you're watching Rise of Skywalker that, and this is of no slant against anyone who made it because gosh, they're left with very few options. But you do feel like, oh, they're talking to a ghost. You know,
Hmm.
they're building dialogue around things she said in outtakes of the last movie, and as a result, the dialogue's incredibly stilted. She's not really looking at anybody. Um, just the emotional human connection that she has, well, obviously, when you'd have a living person on set, just isn't there. And they were saddled with a really difficult situation with that. And I don't know how they could have handled it better. So I'm definitely not going to be the person to say they didn't handle it right.
Right.
But if that's the excuse for Kelly Marie Tran, then I just don't buy it because I don't know how much they would have used Leia anyway. I can't imagine they cut all that much because my understanding is that you'd probably keep her appearances pretty brief. You wouldn't want to build too much of the story around her, which they didn't.
Hmm. The other big thing, and I don't want people that are listening to this thinking that I'm trying to like poo poo all over Rise of Skywalker, because I did like it. Like overall, I liked a lot of the set pieces, and I liked some of the storyline. Not everything, but overall liked it. Thought it is what we got from how they wanted to run the trilogy. But the big thing that I got, which it really frustrated me, was you have the Last Jedi. They're calling for their allies. Nobody responds. But yet Lando goes out there for like what, 2 hours, 4 hours, half a day, whatever it is, and gets a fleet of like every kind of ship that they've probably ever made in the extended universe and Legends thing, and they're just basically like slapping them all on the screen at the same time. And you got to think, like, I'm thinking to myself, really? Like Ge- General, Leia has sent out the call for help. No one's coming, and yet Lando, which I love Lando. Don't get me wrong. Like, I love Lando. I want a Donald Glover Lando trilogy. It would be wonderful. But dang, if I don't buy it. I don't have that buy-in for all of a sudden they're going to come into this place where there's like all these star destroyers and Sith and bad guys and people that have been hanging out for like years and years and years, ready to like exact vengeance, and they're coming to the rescue because of Lando.
You know what? With that classic Billy D. Williams suaveness and sexiness, maybe this tracks. Maybe that's what we really needed to get the entire galaxy in line. But no, you're totally right. That's hilarious to think about because one of the overarching themes of the Last Jedi is very much that yes, help has not come and help is not going to come, but we don't need it because we have each other, and that's what the movie leaves you on. It's a film in the sense where it's it's the downer of the trilogy, most
It's the
certainly.
Empire Strikes Back. It's
It
the down
absolutely is.
film.
It absolutely is. It's the film where we all get beaten up and we have to get back up. And it does that really, really well. And to this film's credit, to Rise of Skywalker's credit, everyone gets back up. And it's a much more hopeful film. And I think that's what a lot of Star Wars fans are looking for. But you're right. Why would folks not come to Leia Organa, right? Like the beacon of hope and rebellion for decades throughout the galaxy. That's an astute observation I haven't even thought a ton about. And to be entirely honest, JJ probably didn't either, and that's probably part of the problem. Yeah, goodness, man, I mean, my big one was the backtracking from the last film, and obviously I like the last film a lot more, but I felt that on a creative level, that's what frustrated me the most. And similar to you, I'm not saying I hate the film. I'm not poo-pooing it and saying that you shouldn't like the film if you do. In fact, there were a ton of things I really did like about it, and I will buy it and I will watch it for the rest of my life. But as a fellow creative, as someone, I'm a musician and podcaster and all those things, and we all do these creative things. And I think about, oh my gosh, if I was to do something really creative and then someone was to continue that creativity beyond me and just instead of augment and celebrate whatever I did to get them to that next spot, they just rewrote it. And then on their press circuit, kind of made fun of it, which is what JJ, Daisy Ridley, and John Boyega did. Um, I would feel terrible. I didn't think it was handled in a particularly respectful way for the creativity that Rian Johnson put into that film. Not only did they backtrack so many of his decisions, but then they went out on a press tour and talked about how it was not fun making that film and they didn't like his choices. And I thought someone who said it really astutely was Elijah Wood. Elijah Wood was on Twitter and he was like, "Hey, I've been in a lot of movies that people don't like, and people have very controversial opinions over, and that's most certainly the case." He was in Lord of the Rings, and he was like, "But it's not my job to go and be down on the creative efforts of people I've worked with. That's not my place." And I really agreed with him because it made me feel a little bit less. I didn't feel like I could appreciate these actors quite as much when I saw that they wanted to do that to this previous film.
Mhm.
And I think that was my biggest issue is the lack of respect for what came before, because like or hate The Last Jedi, it's a creative film that tried its best. You can't say that Rian Johnson doesn't love Star Wars. When he was in his teen years, he went to Tanzania and spilled fake blue milk inside of the real homestead because he wanted to drink fake blue milk there. And when you go to Luke's homestead now, there's a blue milk stain from Rian Johnson as a teenager, the future director of Star Wars. It's like the love was there for it. And I think that is what upset me the most about the new film is that, come on, JJ, like stick with what the guy before you did. Like work to improve it and augment it. Don't rewrite it. And that's what I felt a lot of The Rise of Skywalker spent doing, is it spent a lot of time rewriting. And then as a result, it lost out on a lot of the more intricate story elements that seem to be what both fans and critics alike seem to want more of when they saw this film.
Absolutely. Like, and that was, I think, somebody has, on Twitter, of course, it I read the take of, you could watch The Force Awakens and you could watch Rise of Skywalker and almost not need The Last Jedi because of what they had done to do that backtracking. It's almost like where there are story elements where they would need Last Jedi to like kind of fit in, but overall it's almost like they tried to exclude it. And it's like you said, they really should have just, okay, here's what was presented, let's take it and just work with it and go through. But that's the other thing that's happened since Disney's taken over, is they've had that round table of, or I guess I don't want to say like, the merry-go-round of like taking directors in and then saying, okay, you know what, there's creative differences, goodbye to you, bring in somebody else to like finish it off, like Ron Howard on Solo,
Sure,
um,
sure.
Trevorrow on Rise of Skywalker for J.J. Abrams to come back in. It's definitely something where you just gotta wonder, like, is it? I guess the thing that I want to say, like, and you mentioned like how Marvel, because again it's all under like the Disney banner, but Marvel has Kevin Feige. And I really think if they really want to give somebody the reins for like the next 10 years, next 20 years, they have the perfect candidate there. And that's Dave Filoni, who does lead Star Wars Rebels and who has been influential in a lot of these Star Wars things where like Kathleen Kennedy even said like I go to Dave Filoni to like get information on what's going on in the universe sometimes.
Oh my gosh, is there a man in the world that loves Star Wars more than Dave Filoni? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I mean, I can't believe that we're getting another Rebels season to begin with. Or
Fair.
not Rebels, Clone
Clone
Wars.
Wars, yeah.
I can't believe we're getting that. What they did with Star Wars Rebels was wonderful. I haven't seen all of it, but I've read enough of what they've done where it's like, dang, like here this man is building out everything that Star Wars fans want, and maybe some of the movie going Star Wars fans haven't seen it, but get this man like a contract for just I don't know, like executive overseer of the Star Wars universe
Right.
because there's so much that he could tap into regardless of like what era you want to stick people in because there's more than enough like opportunity for expansion.
For sure. And I also think that Star Wars thrives on something very specific that uh, was partially intact and partially missing from the sequel trilogy. And I think that is young, and by young, I mean like green, folks that have not been in the industry a lot, creatives really burgeoning into successful creatives inside of Star Wars. If you look at Star Wars, the original films, George Lucas was kind of a nobody. I mean, there was American Graffiti and THX, but that was it.
Hmm.
Um, and all these actors were nobodies. And then when you look at these new films, we've been introduced to Daisy Ridley and John Boyega and less so Oscar Isaac. He had been in a ton. But my point being is that I really do believe that Star Wars is a kind of expansive and inclusive universe when it wants to be, that is so conducive to letting people be creative with it that normally wouldn't get the opportunity to. I that's why I think it was in part sometimes a mistake to just hand it to people like J.J. Abrams. Like hand it to someone who has less experience. I actually want that. I actually think that the best Star Wars I've seen in many years was directed by Deborah Chow, who is the director of several of the episodes of The Mandalorian. And before that, she had done very little. Bryce Dallas Howard's episode of The Mandalorian was terrific. Um, Taika Waititi's episode was terrific. Not that Taika Waititi's actually becoming a known quantity, which is lovely and amazing
Hmm.
in so many ways. He's the best. But my point being is like let this be a playground for the most talented people that have yet to have an opportunity for their big shot to take it. And that's what Star Wars started out being, and I think that's what it should be again. And I really hope they continue to do that with the TV stuff in particular, because now Deborah Chow is going to be directing the Obi-Wan series. So I have hope for it there, and I think that's another place that Disney can let it flourish and let new and exciting people have an opportunity to be creative. Because like I like JJ, I don't have anything against him. I wish he had done this last film differently, but I've also seen enough J.J. Abrams films. Like he's kind of got his hands in so many pies. Like he's done Star Trek, he's done Star Wars, he's done so many other things. Like I know how he's going to make a movie. I've seen the lens flares.
Hmm.
Let's see someone else do this. And that's what I hope Disney starts to do a little bit more of, maybe as they feel more comfortable financially to do it with things like television.
Yeah, the Mandalorian has been one of those again. When they announced the Mandalorian, I was like, "Oh man, I was not interested at all. I had no care because you think Mandalorian, you think Boba Fett, and I'm like, Boba Fett, like he's overplayed. He's that character where they just tried to shoehorn him into like everything that they were doing, and I I watched the show, like I got into it, and there's a part of me, and I hate to bring this up in a Star Wars discussion, but it's like there's a part of me where the Mandalorian is like what Firefly could have been at times if we had
Yes,
gotten more Firefly.
sure.
And I love like those classic spaghetti westerns and old classic samurai movies that inspired George Lucas to even, do Star Wars, Hidden Fortress. Um,
Sure, Seven Samurais,
so,
absolutely.
so like you have all of those influences, and you have these you have these stunning characters, and you got the backgrounds, and you have it where you don't need to know, like, one of the episodes ends, and then it starts up with the somebody trying to track down the Mandalorian, and it's like, well, I don't really need to know, like, how that happened or when it started or whatever. You've given, like, you're putting me like right in it, and I am good to go on that. And that is how, like, I would love to see movies where it, like, almost like, here's your spy movie, here's your Star Wars noir movie, here's your movie where maybe, like, you're at a cantina, and you're getting all these different stories that just happen to interconnect, like Usual Suspects kind of thing, where you just, like, there's so much that you can do in this sandbox, this galaxy, and I just want them to experiment, and I don't want Disney or Lucasfilm. I don't want them to be reactionary to, like, where people were like, "Oh, I hated Solo." Like, I thought Solo was a good movie. I enjoyed Solo. And it's like, take those risks, take those chances. Things are not always going to work out. People forget Marvel had The Incredible Hulk. It is not the best movie, but
No.
it's there. And then you get the experiments. Like, whoever thought Guardians of the Galaxy or Ant-Man would be movies that people are like, we didn't ask for these. Like, where's our other Marvel characters? But yet they work, and they worked well.
Absolutely. And I think also when you look at the budget of what they're doing on Disney Plus, uh, Mandalorian episodes cost 15 million a pop, meaning they spent, let's see, 15 times 8, they spent 120 million dollars to do an entire season of The Mandalorian. Well, Rise of Skywalker cost twice that. It cost 200, over twice that, $275 million dollars for one movie. So I think the financial burden on Disney to be more uh, creative, I think is possible with television. And I think that's why we got The Mandalorian the way we got it, because I was explaining it to a coworker who has never seen Star Wars and doesn't, I'm sorry, they have seen Star Wars and they don't like Star Wars. And I was like, oh, well, you should still give this a shot, because if you like Westerns, which they do, this is a Western.
Hmm.
I would argue it's more so Western than Star Wars. You have everything from your spaghetti Western stingers every single time he appears behind a corner and catches the bad guy off guard. Everything about it is so different, and I think that is because you have wonderful creatives like, Bryce Dallas Howard and like Deborah Cho and Dave Filoni and Taika Waititi, all working on this, that normally would not have the opportunity to play in that sandbox because the stakes are so high and it's so expensive. So maybe that's how it happens. But in regard to the movies as well, moving forward, we don't have any more of the Star Wars story movies because Solo and Rogue One were not received particularly well, which I'm actually in your camp with. I don't know how you feel about Rogue One, but I love them both. I think they're great movies. I was super bummed that they killed the whole Star Wars story thing. But moving forward, now we have Ryan Johnson's trilogy, which is TBA, and I'm hesitant they're going to cancel it because it's Ryan Johnson and because he had such backlash from The Last Jedi. But let's also not forget that The Last Jedi was more critically and financially successful than Rise of Skywalker has been. So maybe the pendulum is going to now return back maybe toward the middle. So they have him in the buffer, and then they had the Game of Thrones guys, Benioff and Weiss, and then fired, not fired them, where they just mysteriously went away because obviously someone would not want to direct Star Wars. I most certainly got from that Disney let them say that they were walking away.
Hmm.
Were almost certainly can. I would assume because of their handling of the Game of Thrones fandom, which uh, if they handle that like that, I don't know how they're going to handle Star Wars fans. So we have a couple things in the buffer because whatever they were working on has allegedly been transitioned to another creative team. And I hope it's something new and different in the sense of like taking us to the Old Republic. I badly want to see that in a film, both from the movies and the games. The Old Republic, for those unfamiliar, is hundreds of thousands of years before all the Star Wars we're currently familiar with, where there's hundreds, thousands of Jedi and Sith, and the galaxy is much more fractured in that regard. It's not the whole like two and two thing that we're used to.
Hmm.
Love to see more of that. I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see more of the stuff like The Mandalorian that is one off and separated and isolated. I like that the stakes are lower in The Mandalorian. It's not about saving the entire galaxy.
Hmm.
It's about saving Baby Yoda, which honestly is the most important thing to save, period. Baby Yoda is the greatest thing to ever happen to humanity as a whole, perhaps. We might have reached peak humanity and everything's downhill from here because Baby Yoda's incredible. But I kid, but in seriousness, like that's what made it great was that it didn't have those high stakes. So I'm hoping with all this future stuff in the buffer that they have, like use some of those stories and be open to those and just let the Skywalker stuff go. Like it's been great. I've loved it and appreciated it. 9 films have been great, but let's call it quits.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I really feel like if they have that one person, again, suggesting Dave Filoni, to really just, you know, keep watch over things. Make sure that there's no like overlap or they're pulling things from the wrong direction or they start to wander down paths that they don't need to wander down. Because I would love to see Disney, Lucasfilm, whatever you want to, whoever's giving the money, like get like 5 directors and be like, here's $50 million. Go make like the best Star Wars movie you can make with that money and just see what they come up with. Because
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you have people now making movies on iPhones and stuff that are comparable to some of like the indie movies that are out there now. Why not take some risks? Why not go for it and just shoot your shot on this? I mean, especially, and here's my other thing that I'd love, and it's one of the things that I push for, and I think that they do real well because they can do it a lot better on the animated stuff. Is give me more alien main characters. Like I watched Rogue One again
Yeah.
a week or so ago, and there's one like rebel trooper who's like this weird looking alien with a mouth big like full of teeth and everything. I'm like, I want to know more about that guy's story. Like give me more of that. Give me more of species that you've seen, but let us dive into them. Let us know like their history, their culture, their stories. Like give me stuff other than humans.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like for example, with The Mandalorian again, you have one of the greatest living directors in the tent and you're using and he's great, don't get me wrong, he's great in the show, but he's basically being used as a secondary character in 3 episodes, Werner Herzog. Like, give this man a Star Wars show. If he likes Star Wars, I didn't know he did apparently, but apparently he does. Let him do something because he is extraordinary, and whatever he does will be super weird, and it'll be really fun. I would love to see that. I think there's just a lot of opportunity there, and I really hope that Disney takes advantage of it. And similarly, I hope that they temper themselves more with burnout. This is something that Mark Hamill has talked about at length, and as to his theory why Star Wars story films did not perform as well, and perhaps also Rise of Skywalker. Rise of Skywalker took a lot longer to reach the 1 billion threshold than the 2 films before it, and that burnout comes from do we need a Star Wars film every year? Because I remember growing up and a lot of the franchises that I loved, and maybe I'm wrong on this and time's just acting differently because I was 12, but I remember like Harry Potter movies I don't believe came out every year. Maybe they did, but I don't remember getting stuff as quickly on these beloved franchises. Like Lord of the Rings, I don't think those came out year after year.
I did a episode on that. They did come out a one after the other every year because they had filmed them
Did
all
they
together.
really?
So
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm
they just
mistaken then.
released, and I think Harry Potter was every year, um, with the exception of like the final film, which they split into two, and then that was like
Oh,
6 months apart.
okay.
But yeah, they like I remember like let's say Jurassic Park. You had Jurassic Park. You didn't have Lost World until a couple of years later. You didn't have like Jurassic Park 3 until a couple of years later. There was that gap of time. Like the original Star Wars trilogy was like 77, 80, and 83-ish,
Right. Yep.
maybe. And it's like you need that time. And I think even now, like I was talking to somebody about the Marvel MCU, and I'm like, I'm glad that we're having downtime. We had Avengers Endgame, we had Spider-Man, and then we've had a break until Black Widow comes out. And then even then, we have a break until the Eternals comes out. Like there's only 2 movies this year instead of 3 or 4. And
Right.
we're getting that time to kind of breathe and go see other movies or go reflect on what's been out there. And Star Wars needs that break. We do not need a Star Wars movie every year. We need just slow your roll.
Right. Well, I don't know if you've seen the photos of Kumail Nanjiani for Eternals, but I think everyone needs a break to sit and breathe because they're not going to be able to breathe as soon as they see him on screen. And that glow up is just whole what happened there. Oh my God. I digress. Yeah, you look back on, let's see, when did Solo come out? Was that 2017 or 18? That was 2018. Okay. So you had Last Jedi come out December 2017, and then you had Solo come out early May 2018. You had a 6-month gap, not even a full 6 months before you got those two films from one another. And I remember going to see Solo in May of 2018 and thinking to myself, like, why am I here at the theater right now for Star Wars? Like, this is kind of weird. I did this 6 months ago, and now I'm not quite as excited. And I still love the film, but I think that is one of the many reasons that Solo did less than half of what a Star Wars film can expect to do at the box office. And they just need to take that break. I think you're 100% right, and I think they're finally taking it now that the trilogy is over, and maybe the stuff that they do on Disney Plus can just come at a steady pace. I know they're going to film Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan show this year. They're going to film I'm blanking on the man's name from Rogue One.
Castian Andor.
Yes, they're gonna film the Cassian show. That should be kind of cool. And I'm sure they have other stuff in the hopper too. And to do that stuff on the side, I think is fine. But when it comes to the movies in particular, the event of going to the movies to see Star Wars, I think you gotta just lay up a little bit, because even this last time, it was easier for me to get tickets. The theater wasn't as packed, and I went, Thursday night, prime time to see all the Star Wars craziness. I didn't see a ton of people dressed up. The movie theater wasn't totally full. There wasn't the insanity I'd seen the last 2 times. And I think that is in part because they're going way too fast.
All right. Last question before we wrap up, Brett, is there, and I want to, reference back to Last Jedi, is there hope? Is there a spark that the Star Wars fandom is going to get off its shit and get back to being a more like inclusive, I hate to say it's a reflection of like what's happening in current society, but I'd really love to like have Star Wars people be like the Star Wars people that I used to remember growing up as a kid. Is there hope for
Yes,
that?
there is a new hope. I think it is in people. I've mentioned her like 3 times, but like Deborah Chow, I think the people that, like let's have, like I keep mentioning these names from The Mandalorian, and let's not forget that I'm mentioning women, and I'm mentioning, people that aren't just white men. And that's huge with The Mandalorian, is like, let's keep people of color and women in leadership roles in both in the cast and behind the camera, which The Mandalorian's done a great job with. Disney have some balls and just keep Ryan Johnson around. Like, I know that he pissed you off with The Last Jedi, but let's also not forget that the man directed a $300 million movie from an original script that's a detective film this year. He is one of them with Knives Out. He's one of the most talented people in the industry. Don't lose him. Keep him around and he'll do something great and exciting. And I think that if we can lean more toward that, and lean less toward the fanfare of give me what I want, give me my fan service, J.J. Abrams, which is what a lot of Star Wars has been recently, for better and for worse. Sometimes fan service is really fun, and it was. That's going to be better. Star Wars deserves to go new places and be helmed by new people, and I think we're seeing the tide turning in that regard. And I think, I think back to, and this is going to be a reference that only some of your listeners will remember, but I remember Blizzard, the company Blizzard, making the World of Warcraft games. And for years, fans said, hey, we want classic Warcraft. We want you to go back and make this game like it was when we first played it 15 years ago. And there's this famous quote where leadership got on stage at BlizzCon and said, you think you want it, but you don't. And they were mocked for that for years. And then finally they came back and said, you guys were right. You did want this, and we're gonna make it. And I think the same thing can be said for the Star Wars fandom. They think that they want certain things, and maybe they don't. And I think that was discovered with The Rise of Skywalker. They got the fan service they wanted. They got rid of Kelly Marie Tran, and I'm sure all the trolls love that. And almost universally, both financially and critically, it was not as well received. So let's send that pendulum the other direction, and I do think there is hope for that, even if it's mostly on Disney+. So we'll see. I'm very excited to see Ian McGregor back. I think that's going to be great.
Oh, I'm very excited for that, too. It's been a long time in the making, and I'm ready for it. But now our time is up. So, Brett, where can people find you on the internet if they want to check out your podcast, anywhere that you want to have them come visit you?
Absolutely. If you want to come yell at me about my opinions on Star Wars, you can do so at I am Brett Stewart. That is BRETTSTEWART on Twitter. And of course, you can listen to the Movie Go Round podcast, where it's a rotating thematic calendar of films that we talk about. And we talk about just about everything from future classics, as David mentioned, to things like You Did This to Us, where the audience gets to vote on what we're watching. We recently did our 100th episode, which was a You Did This to Us, and we watched Twilight, and it was bad. So if you are into that sort of thing and you would like to torture us every 5 weeks, you too can make me watch Twilight. Ugh, woof. So check it out there. Just search Movie Go Round on any podcast feed and you'll find it.
All right, and I'll have the links in our show notes to your Twitter and Movie Go Round. And I do want to say congratulations on that 100th episode for you and the rest of the group, because I love what you all three of you have done, and I try to listen as much as I can. But I'm so happy for you guys.
Oh, well, thank you. You've been on the show before, and you'll be on the show again. Hopefully, we'll send you an invite soon. But it's always great to have fellow podcasters that we just love to support, love what they're doing. Tales from the Fandom is one of our favorite shows, all three of us. So thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.